The massive alien ship Silent Talon slipped through Earth's atmosphere like a shadow. Its black hull barely disturbed the air as advanced stealth technology made it invisible to human detection systems. On the bridge, Captain Nexus stood before a wall of glowing screens, his tall frame casting long shadows across the control room. His 4 yellow eyes moved independently as he studied the planet below, each one processing different streams of data about this new world. The ship belonged to the Vorthak Empire, a civilization that had conquered dozens of worlds across the galaxy. They were methodical in their approach to invasion. First came the scouts, then detailed analysis, and finally, overwhelming force. It was a system that had never failed them before. Lieutenant Corval worked at his station, tentacles dancing across holographic controls as he analyzed Earth's technological capabilities. The readings were almost laughably primitive by Vorthak standards. These humans still burned fossil fuels for energy and launched themselves into space using controlled explosions. Their weapons were simple projectiles that relied on chemical reactions rather than energy manipulation. "Captain, initial scans confirm our intelligence reports," Corval announced, his voice carrying the confident tone of someone delivering obviously. "Good news. The dominant species shows no signs of advanced technology. They appear to be in an early industrial phase, possibly transitioning to basic digital communications." Nexus nodded slowly, his main eyes focusing on the tactical display while his smaller secondary eyes continued monitoring other systems. The planet was beautiful in its simplicity. Blue oceans covered most of the surface, with green and brown land masses scattered between them. White clouds swirled in patterns that reminded him of his homeworld before the great cities had been built. The ship descended through the cloud layer, its advanced sensors penetrating deep into the landmass below. They had chosen the Korean Peninsula for their observation post based on intelligence gathered from intercepted communications. This region seemed to have a good balance of human civilization and natural wilderness, perfect for studying both their technology and behavior patterns. Dense forests covered the mountainous terrain, broken occasionally by small villages and winding roads. The Vorthak had perfected the art of hidden observation over centuries of conquest. Their equipment could monitor individual conversations from orbit, while remaining completely undetectable to primitive scanning technology. "Establishing observation post now," reported the navigation officer. The ship settled into a hover pattern above a particularly thick section of forest, its camouflage systems adapting to match the surrounding environment. From the ground, even someone looking directly up would see nothing but empty sky and tree branches. Nexus walked to the observation deck, where massive screens showed real-time images of the human settlements below. The villages looked peaceful enough, with small buildings clustered around central areas and networks of paths connecting different sections. Smoke rose from various points, indicating the humans were still using fire for heating and cooking. Primitive but not unusual for a pre-contact civilization. "Begin full-spectrum analysis," he commanded. "I want complete behavioral profiles on the local population, study their daily routines, social structures, and response patterns to threats. The invasion fleet will need detailed intelligence on how these humans react under pressure." The crew went to work immediately, deploying invisible sensor drones throughout the region. These microscopic devices could monitor everything from heart rates to electromagnetic brain activity, without the subjects ever knowing they were being watched. It was technology so advanced that humans wouldn't develop anything similar for centuries, if they survived long enough. In one of the villages below, a man named Hyun Woo was beginning his morning routine completely unaware that alien technology was cataloging his every movement. He wore the uniform of what the Vorthak computers identified as a park ranger, some kind of local authority figure responsible for monitoring the natural environment. Their analysis suggested he was probably unarmed and posed no threat to their operation. Hyun-woo checked his equipment methodically, placing various tools into a sturdy backpack. His movements were efficient and practiced, suggesting years of experience in his role. The aliens noted his calm demeanor and steady vital signs, categorizing him as a typical example of human behavior during routine activities. "This should be straightforward," Nexus thought to himself as he watched Hyunwoo disappear into the forest on what appeared to be a standard patrol route. The humans seemed predictable and harmless, exactly what their preliminary reports had suggested. The invasion would proceed as planned, with minimal resistance expected from such a primitive species. None of them realized they were about to witness something that would change their understanding of humanity forever. The morning sun filtered through the dense canopy as Hyunwoo made his way along the familiar mountain trail. His boots crunched softly on fallen leaves, and he breathed in the crisp mountain air that always made him feel alive. He had been patrolling these forests for over 8 years, and he knew every path, every stream, and every sound that belonged here. That's why the roaring immediately caught his attention. The sound was wrong. It wasn't the territorial call of a healthy bear or the warning growl of a mother protecting her cubs. This was pure agony, a desperate cry that made his stomach tighten with concern. Hyunwoo quickened his pace, following the sound deeper into the forest where most people never ventured above him. Invisible alien sensors tracked his every movement. The Vorthak crew watched with mild interest as their test subject deviated from his normal patrol route. They expected him to investigate briefly, then return to safety once he identified the source of the disturbance. After all, that would be the logical response for any intelligent being faced with the sound of a large predator in distress. The roaring grew louder as Hyunwoo pushed through thick undergrowth, branches catching at his uniform. When he finally reached a small clearing, his heart sank at what he saw. A massive Asiatic black bear, easily 300 kilograms of muscle and fur, was trapped in an illegal wire snare. The thick metal cables had tightened around the animal's hind leg, cutting deep into the flesh. Blood stained the ground around the trap, and the bear's eyes held a mixture of pain and fury that would terrify most people. Aboard the alien ship, Lieutenant Korval adjusted his sensors to get a better reading on the situation. The bear was clearly a dangerous predator, capable of crushing a human skull with a single swipe of its massive paws. The logical response would be immediate retreat, possibly followed by a call for assistance from other humans with appropriate weapons. But Hyunwoo didn't retreat. Instead, he stood at the edge of the clearing studying the situation with calm eyes. The bear noticed him immediately, rearing up on its hind legs despite the pain from the snare. It let out a thunderous roar that echoed through the forest, a clear warning that sent birds flying from nearby trees. The creature's claws, each as long as a human finger, gleamed in the dappled sunlight. "Easy there, friend," Hyunwoo said softly, his voice barely above a whisper. He didn't move closer yet, but he didn't back away either. "I can see you're in trouble. Let me help you." On the alien ship, alarms began sounding at various monitoring stations. The human stress indicators were spiking dramatically. His heart rate had increased, adrenaline was flooding his system, and his breathing had become shallow and rapid. Every biological marker suggested he was experiencing extreme fear, yet he continued to move forward. Captain Nexus found himself leaning closer to the viewing screen, his 4 eyes focusing intently on this impossible scene. In all their years of studying primitive civilizations, they had never encountered behavior like this. Fear was a universal survival mechanism. When faced with a superior predator, intelligent beings fled or fought back with overwhelming force. They didn't approach calmly and offer assistance. Hyunwoo slowly reached into his backpack, his movements deliberate and non-threatening. The bear watched him suspiciously, alternating between aggressive posturing and whimpers of pain. When Hyunwoo pulled out a pair of heavy-duty wire cutters, the animal seemed to understand that this strange human wasn't a threat. "I know it hurts," Hyunwoo continued in the same gentle tone, taking a careful step forward. "These poachers set illegal traps all through these mountains. You're not the first animal I've found like this, and unfortunately, you won't be the last." The bear dropped back to all fours, its massive head tracking Hyunwoo's movements. The animal was clearly torn between its natural fear of humans and its desperate need for help. The snare was cutting deeper with every movement, and they both knew that without intervention, the bear would either bleed to death or be forced to chew off its own leg to escape. Lieutenant Korval frantically recalibrated his instruments, convinced there must be some error in the readings. "Captain, this makes no sense. The human's fear response is at maximum levels, yet his actions suggest complete calm. Our behavioral models have no framework for this type of contradiction. Nexus raised one of his four hands, silencing his subordinate. He wanted to watch this impossible scenario play out without interruption. Hyunwoo was now within arm's reach of the bear, close enough that the animal could easily kill him with a single swipe. The bear's breathing was labored and foam had begun to form around its mouth from the stress and pain, but instead of attacking, it seemed to be studying this small human who had approached it without weapons or backup. "That's it," Hyunwoo whispered, kneeling beside the trap. "Just hold still for a moment. I'm going to cut these wires and then you'll be free." The wire cutters bit through the first cable with a sharp snap, and the bear flinched but didn't. "Move away." Hyunwoo worked quickly but carefully, knowing that any sudden movement could trigger an attack response. As each wire parted, the pressure on the bear's leg decreased and the animal's posture began to relax slightly. When the last wire snapped, the bear stepped backward, testing its injured leg gingerly. Deep cuts marked where the cables had bitten into flesh, but the bleeding was already beginning to slow. Hyunwoo pulled a first aid kit from his pack and began treating the wounds with the same calm efficiency he had shown throughout the rescue. The aliens watched in complete silence as this human, this supposedly primitive being, provided medical care to a creature that could have easily killed him. The sound of a vehicle engine echoed through the forest as Dr. Yoonji's modified SUV bounced along the rough mountain path. She had received Hyunwoo's emergency call just 2 hours earlier, and despite the difficult terrain, she had made record time getting to the remote location. Her vehicle was specially equipped for wildlife emergencies, with a mobile veterinary clinic built into the back and emergency medical supplies that could handle everything from injured birds to large mammals. Aboard the alien ship, the Vorthak, crew watched with growing fascination as this new human arrived at the scene. Their sensors immediately began analyzing her vital signs and equipment. Unlike Hyunwoo, who was clearly some kind of forest guardian, this human appeared to be a specialist in animal medicine. Her arrival suggested that humans had developed organized systems for helping injured wildlife, which was already more sophisticated than their initial assessments had indicated. Yoonji parked her vehicle and quickly surveyed the scene. The bear was still conscious but clearly in pain, lying on its side near where Hyunwoo had freed it from the trap. The park ranger had done excellent first aid work, cleaning and bandaging the wounds, but the animal needed proper medical attention to prevent infection and ensure full recovery. "How long has it been since you freed him?" Yoonji asked, pulling on surgical gloves as she approached the bear without any apparent fear. "About 3 hours, Hyunwoo replied, staying close to provide assistance. "The cuts are deep, but I don't think any major arteries were damaged. He's been calm since I got the snare off." What happened next stunned the watching aliens even more than the initial rescue. Yoonji prepared a sedative injection, approaching the massive bear with the same calm confidence that Hyunwoo had shown. The animal, weighing more than both humans combined, watched her approach but made no aggressive moves. It was as if the bear understood that these strange creatures were trying to help. Captain Nexus found himself gripping the edge of his command console as he watched the small human inject the sedative directly into the bear's shoulder. The animal barely flinched, and within minutes its breathing became slow and steady as the medication took effect. "Impossible," whispered one of the junior officers. "She just voluntarily got within striking distance of an apex predator. Our combat manuals specifically warn against approaching wounded animals because they're at their most dangerous." But Yoonji wasn't finished. As the bear fell into a deep sleep, she began setting up a field surgical station right there in the forest clearing. She laid out sterile instruments, connected portable power supplies, and began cleaning the wounds with methodical precision. Her hands never shook, her breathing remained steady, and her focus was absolute. "Run a full analysis on their species database," Nexus ordered, his voice tight with something that might have been fear. "I want to know everything about these humans, their behavior patterns, their evolutionary history, their social structures, everything." The ship's computers began processing vast amounts of data, pulling information from intercepted communications, satellite observations, and their own sensor readings. What they found challenged every assumption they had made about Earth's dominant species. Lieutenant Corville's voice was barely steady as he read the initial findings. Captain, according to our analysis, this behavior isn't unusual for humans. They routinely enter burning structures to rescue strangers, even when there's no chance of survival. They dive into turbulent waters to save drowning victims, knowing they might drown themselves. They throw themselves in front of moving vehicles to push others to safety. The data continued to pour in, painting a picture that defied everything the Vorthak understood about evolutionary behavior. Humans didn't just help members of their own species. They risked their lives for animals, for enemies, even for abstract concepts like justice or freedom. Their capacity for self-sacrifice was so extreme that it seemed like a fundamental flaw in their design. Look at these historical records, Corville continued, his tentacles trembling as he manipulated the display. Controls. They don't just help dangerous animals, they domesticate them. They bring wolves into their homes and turn them into companions. They keep large cats as pets. Some humans even form bonds with reptilian predators that could swallow them whole. Screens shifted to show real-time footage from around the globe. In one image, a human child was playing with a dog that outweighed her by 50 kilograms. The animal's ancestors had been pack hunters capable of bringing down prey much larger than humans, yet here it was, gently allowing the child to climb, on its back. Another image showed Jin Ho, a local farmer from the valley below their observation post. He was hand-feeding two massive dogs that served as guardians for his livestock. These weren't small, harmless pets. Each dog was a powerful predator in its own right, bred for strength and aggression, yet they responded to Jin Ho's commands with absolute loyalty and affection. "This changes everything," Nexus muttered, his four eyes processing the implications. "We assumed we were dealing with a primitive species that would panic and scatter when faced with superior force. But these aren't primitive beings at all. They're apex predators who have learned to mask their true nature behind acts of compassion." Back in the forest clearing, Yunji had finished her surgery and was monitoring the bear's recovery. The animal's breathing was strong and steady, and the wounds had been properly cleaned and sutured. In a few hours, it would wake up completely healed and ready to return to its normal life in the wild. "You did good work keeping him calm," Yunji told Hyunwoo as they packed up the medical equipment. "Most people would have panicked and made the situation worse." Hyunwoo shrugged, as if approaching a massive predator was just another part of his job. He needed help, that's what we do, right? Help when we can. The aliens listening to this conversation felt a chill run through their collective consciousness. These humans didn't see their actions as extraordinary or heroic. To them, risking their lives to help others was simply normal behavior. They were a species of warriors who chose compassion over conquest, and that made them more dangerous than any enemy the Vorthak had ever encountered. The Vorthak surveillance network expanded across the planet like an invisible web, their advanced sensors monitoring human activity in dozens of locations simultaneously. What they discovered in the following week shattered every preconceived notion they had about Earth's dominant species. The incident with the bear wasn't an isolated event or the actions of one unusually brave individual. This type of behavior appeared to be woven into the very fabric of human society. Off the southern coast of Korea, marine biologist Soo-jin descended into the crystal-clear waters wearing nothing but a wetsuit and basic diving equipment. The alien sensors tracked her descent as she swam directly toward a group of large sharks that were feeding in the area. According to Vorthak behavioral models, this should have been suicide. These creatures were perfectly designed killing machines, with razor-sharp teeth and predatory instincts honed over millions of years of evolution. But Soo-jin showed no fear as she approached the sharks, her movements slow and deliberate. She carried a waterproof camera and research equipment, documenting their behavior patterns while swimming mere meters away from jaws that could bite her in half. When one of the larger sharks turned toward her with obvious curiosity, she remained perfectly still, allowing the predator to investigate her presence. The watching aliens were speechless as the shark brushed against her, its rough skin scraping along her wetsuit before losing interest and swimming away. Soo-jin continued her research for another hour, collecting data and samples while surrounded by creatures that her own species had once considered monsters. To her, they were simply animals worthy of study and protection. Meanwhile, In the mountain ranges to the north, rescue specialist Dong Min was demonstrating another impossible aspect of human behavior. A distress call had come in about climbers trapped on a dangerous peak during a sudden snowstorm. The conditions were so severe that most intelligent beings would have waited for the weather to clear before attempting any rescue operation. Dong Min didn't wait. He assembled his gear in the driving snow, checking ropes and equipment with practiced efficiency. The mountain face he needed to climb was nearly vertical in places, with loose rock and ice that could give way at any moment. The alien sensors detected avalanche conditions that made the rescue attempt extremely dangerous for everyone involved. But Dong Min began his climb anyway, moving steadily upward through conditions that should have been impossible to navigate. He wasn't climbing for glory or personal gain. Somewhere above him, 3 complete strangers were slowly freezing to death, and that was enough to drive him forward despite the obvious risks to his own life. The Vorthak watched in amazement as he reached the stranded climbers and began the delicate process of getting them down safely. It took 6 hours of careful work in sub-zero temperatures, with Dong Min often placing himself in the most dangerous positions to ensure the others remained secure. When they finally reached the bottom, he was exhausted and suffering from mild hypothermia, but the strangers he had saved were alive and unharmed. At a wildlife sanctuary in the central mountains, veterinarian Minho was displaying the same fearless compassion that had stunned the aliens during the bear rescue. His patient today was a Siberian tiger, one of the largest and most powerful predators on the planet. The animal had been injured in a territorial fight with another tiger, and the wounds on its flank needed immediate medical attention. Minho entered the enclosure armed with nothing but medical supplies and years of experience. The tiger, despite its injuries, was still capable of killing him instantly. Its muscles rippled beneath the orange and black striped coat, and its amber eyes tracked every movement with predatory focus. But Minho approached with the same calm confidence they had seen in all human interactions with dangerous animals. "Easy, big guy," he whispered, preparing a sedative injection. "I know you don't like strangers, but we need to take care of those cuts." The tiger allowed him to approach, perhaps sensing the genuine intention to help. Within minutes, Minho was cleaning and suturing wounds on an animal that weighed 3 times as much as he did, working with steady hands and absolute focus on his patient's welfare. Captain Nexus compiled these observations into a report that would change the course of galactic history. His hands shook as he transmitted the data to Vorthak High Command, knowing that what he was about to tell them would sound impossible to beings who had conquered dozens of worlds through superior firepower and intimidation tactics. "Every tactical advantage we planned relies on intimidation," he reported during the secure communication. "Our standard invasion protocols assume that the target species will panic when faced with overwhelming force. But these humans show mercy to creatures that threaten them. They sacrifice themselves for complete strangers. Our psychological warfare protocols are completely useless against a species that willingly faces death for others." The response from High Command was swift and predictable. "Continue observation. Assess threat potential." But even as Nexus acknowledged the order, he knew that the threat assessment was already becoming clear. These weren't primitive beings who could be easily conquered and enslaved. They were something far more dangerous than the Vorthak had ever encountered. The final confirmation came during what should have been a routine observation of a local school. Teacher Youngsu was leading a group of children on a nature walk through the forest when they encountered something that sent the alien sensors into overdrive. A large wild boar, easily 100 kilograms of muscle and sharp tusks, had wandered into their path and was showing signs of aggression. The logical response would have been to retreat immediately and call for help. Instead, Youngsu stepped between the boar and his students, armed with nothing but a walking stick and absolute determination to protect the children in his care. He spread his arms wide, making himself appear larger while speaking in calm, authoritative tones to both the animal and the frightened children behind him. The boar charged, and Youngsu stood his ground. He used his walking stick to deflect the animal's attack, never once considering his own safety, as he guided the children to safety behind him. The confrontation lasted only minutes, but it demonstrated everything. The aliens needed to know about human nature. When threatened, they didn't run or surrender. They stood and fought, especially when protecting others. As the Boar finally retreated and Youngsu gathered his shaken but unharmed students, Captain Nexus realized that they weren't observing potential subjects for conquest. They were witnessing warriors who chose compassion over violence, beings whose capacity for courage was matched only by their dedication to protecting others. These humans were apex predators disguised as caregivers, and that made them the most dangerous species the Vorthak had ever encountered. 3 days had passed since the dramatic rescue, and Hyunwoo found himself returning to the same forest clearing where everything had begun. It wasn't part of his regular patrol route, but something drew him back to check on the site where he had freed the trapped bear. The morning air was crisp and clean, filled with the sounds of birds and rustling leaves that always made these mountains feel like home. He approached the clearing carefully, not expecting to find anything unusual. The wire snare had been removed and properly disposed of, and he had filed a report about the illegal poaching equipment with the local authorities. Similar traps had been found throughout the region, part of an ongoing problem that kept park rangers like him constantly vigilant. What he didn't expect was to see the bear again. The massive animal was standing at the edge of the clearing, its dark fur gleaming in the dappled sunlight that filtered through the canopy above. Hyunwoo stopped walking, his hand instinctively moving to the radio on his belt. But something about the bear's posture told him this wasn't a threatening encounter. The animal wasn't showing any signs of aggression or fear. Instead, it seemed to be waiting for something. Above them, invisible alien sensors tracked every heartbeat, every breath, every subtle movement between human and bear. The Vorthak crew had been monitoring this location since the original rescue, fascinated by the ongoing relationship between these two very different species. Their scientific equipment registered something they had never seen before in their centuries of observing primitive civilizations. The bear took a step forward, moving with the careful deliberation of an animal testing unknown territory. Its leg showed no signs of the injuries that had nearly crippled it just days earlier. Dr. Yunji's surgical work had been flawless, and the natural healing abilities of the creature had done the rest. The deep cuts from the wire snare had closed completely, leaving barely visible scars beneath the thick fur. Hyunwoo remained perfectly still, letting the bear make the first move. He had worked with wildlife long enough to understand that patience was often the most important tool in his kit. Sudden movements or loud sounds could turn a peaceful encounter into a dangerous one, especially with an animal this large and powerful. But this bear wasn't behaving like a wild animal at all. It approached, slowly, its massive head lowered in what almost looked like a submissive posture. When it reached Hyunwoo, it did something that made the watching aliens question everything they thought they knew about interspecies relationships. The bear gently pressed its nose against Hyunwoo's outstretched hand, holding the contact for several long seconds before pulling back. Lieutenant Corville's voice was barely a whisper as he reported what their sensors were detecting. "Captain, the bear's stress indicators are completely calm. Its behavior patterns suggest gratitude, actual gratitude toward the human who saved its life." Captain Nexus leaned forward, his 4 eyes focusing intently on the scene below. In all their years of studying conquered worlds, they had never encountered anything like this. Primitive species sometimes formed temporary alliances for mutual benefit, but this was different. This was a genuine emotional connection between two completely different forms of life. The bear touched Hyunwoo's hand one more time, as if saying goodbye, then turned and walked back into the forest. It moved with the fluid grace of a perfectly healthy animal, disappearing among the trees as if it had never been there at all. Hyunwoo watched it go, a small smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "Take care of yourself, friend," he said quietly, knowing the bear couldn't understand his words but hoping it might somehow sense his good wishes. That simple moment of connection between human and animal became the final piece of evidence that Captain Nexus needed to complete his report. With trembling appendages, he began composing what he knew would be the most important document in Vorthak military history. The words appeared on his screen in the formal language of military intelligence. Species classification, Deathworld apex predators. Threat level, extreme. Primary characteristics: unprecedented capacity for interspecies bonding, self-sacrifice for strangers, and fearless compassion toward dangerous predators. Standard intimidation protocols ineffective. Recommendation: immediate fleet withdrawal and implementation of diplomatic contact protocols. He paused before adding the final line. These beings do not conquer through force, they conquer through kindness. They are far more dangerous than we initially assessed. The transmission traveled across space at faster-than-light speeds, reaching the Vorthak invasion armada just as they prepared to enter Earth's solar system. The massive fleet consisted of hundreds of warships, each one capable of destroying entire cities. They had been planning a swift, decisive conquest that would add another world to their growing empire. The fleet commander read Nexus's report in stunned silence, then immediately ordered a complete change of course. Within hours, the entire invasion force was heading back toward Vorthak space, leaving Earth's solar system as quietly as they had approached it. Back on Earth, Hyunwoo was completing his patrol when he noticed something strange in the afternoon sky. A faint shimmer, like heat distortion on a summer day, flickered briefly above the tree line before fading away completely. He stopped walking and shielded his eyes, trying to get a better look at whatever had caused the optical illusion. The shimmer appeared again for just a moment, then vanished as if it had never existed. Hyunwoo shrugged and continued down the mountain path, assuming it was probably just atmospheric conditions or maybe a high-altitude aircraft passing overhead. He had no way of knowing that he was watching the departure of an alien scout ship, or that his simple act of kindness toward a wounded bear had just prevented the invasion of his entire planet. In the vast databases of the Vorthak Empire, Earth was quietly reclassified from conquest target to protected world. But the protection wasn't granted out of respect for human rights or diplomatic considerations. It was based on pure, practical fear of what humanity might become if they were ever truly threatened. The Vorthak had learned something that would reshape their understanding of the galaxy. Sometimes the most dangerous predators are the ones who choose not to hunt. And sometimes the greatest act of conquest is simply deciding not to conquer at all. Hyunwoo reached his vehicle as the sun began to set behind the mountains, completely unaware that his compassion had just saved billions of lives across his world. Tomorrow he would return to these forests and continue his work protecting the wildlife that called these mountains home, never knowing that somewhere among the stars, an entire alien civilization had learned to fear the simple kindness of humanity.